I walked through my apartment door expecting silence. Instead, I found Miles sitting at our kitchen counter, divorce papers spread in front of him like a winning hand of cards. His mother, Victoria, stood behind him with a smirk that made my stomach drop. My hand started shaking. My chest tightened. I whispered, "What the hell just happened?" Miles didn't even look up. He just kept signing, his pen moving across the page like I wasn't standing there, like I hadn't spent the last year of my life drowning myself in debt to save his career. My name is Samantha Miller, and this moment changed everything. The flashback hit me instantly. 12 months of sacrifices, sleepless nights, extra shifts at work, every penny I could scrape together going toward his debts. I'd convinced myself we were a team. That love meant carrying each other's weight. But standing there, watching him sign away our marriage without even meeting my eyes, I realized I'd been carrying him alone the entire time. The memories crashed over me like a wave. A year ago, Miles had come home panicked. His business was failing. Creditors were calling. Banks were threatening legal action. He'd made mistakes, big ones, spending money he didn't have, taking risks that didn't pay off. I remembered how small he looked that night, sitting on our couch, his face buried in his hands. I'd felt his fear like it was my own, so I'd stepped in. I'd taken on extra hours at the marketing firm where I worked. I'd picked up weekend shifts. I'd pushed my own dreams aside. Every sacrifice felt worth it because he promised things would change. He promised he'd rebuild. He promised to make it right. He promised to be better. But promises are just words, aren't they? Words don't pay bills. Words don't save marriages. Words don't stop husbands from signing divorce papers at the kitchen counter while their mothers smirk in the background. The betrayal hit deeper because it was personal. It cracked something inside my confidence, made me question every choice I'd made, every late night, every dollar spent. I went back to work the next day, forcing my face into something normal. My coworkers didn't need to know that my world had collapsed. I heard them whispering by the coffee machine. "Did you see Miles in the board meeting?" someone said. "He's acting like he just got promoted or something." Another voice jumped in. "That's because his wife paid off all his debts. He's living free now." They laughed like it was funny, like my sacrifice was entertainment. A colleague, Marcus, pulled me aside later. "He's always been like that," Marcus said quietly. "Getting what he wants, taking what he can get. You're too soft, Samantha. People like that, they see kindness as weakness." His words stung because they were true. I'd been too soft, too trusting, too willing to give everything. But standing there in that break room, listening to them discuss my life like it was gossip, something shifted inside me. A quiet voice whispered, "No more being soft. No more being weak." That night, I sat down with all the financial records. Everything was there because I'd handled the accounts, managed the debts, tracked the payments, organized the documents. But as I looked closer, things didn't add up. There were transfers I didn't remember making. Accounts that showed different amounts than I had recorded. Invoices for work Miles claimed to have done that I couldn't verify. My heart started racing. I'd been so focused on paying his debts, I'd never actually audited what he'd been doing since. What if he was still lying? What if the money hadn't even gone where he said it had? A spark of power ignited inside me. I knew his finances better than anyone. I knew his patterns, his lies, his tricks. Maybe I could reclaim control in ways he never imagined. Maybe all those late nights managing his accounts had given me something useful after all. I grabbed my laptop and started digging deeper. I called my best friend Tasha that night. The moment I heard her voice, the tears came. I told her everything, the betrayal, the divorce papers, the way Miles had just sat there signing his name while his mother watched. My voice shook as I talked about the sacrifices, the extra shifts, the money I'd poured into saving a marriage that was already dead. Tasha listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Samantha," she said slowly, "you're broken right now and that's okay. But don't stay broken. You're not done." Those words landed differently. I was broken, yes. But broken didn't mean defeated. Broken meant I could rebuild into something stronger. Tasha knew me better than almost anyone. She knew I was smart, capable, and when I stopped being kind, I could be strategic. She asked about the finances, the records, the things I'd discovered that didn't add up. "You should look into that," she said. "Because people like Miles, they always leave a trail." Work became the center of my world. I threw myself into projects with intensity I'd never shown before. And that's when I started noticing things. A major client project that Miles was managing had deadlines that didn't make sense. Budget reports that looked inflated. I started asking questions quietly. I pulled up old emails, compared timestamps, checked actual expenses against what was reported. Then Marcus came to me one afternoon. He looked around before pulling me into an empty conference room. "I shouldn't tell you this," he said. "But Miles has been manipulating numbers on the Henderson account. He's been covering personal debt by inflating project costs. The company has probably overpaid by tens of thousands of dollars." My hands went cold. It was exactly the kind of thing Miles would do. Exactly the thing I'd warned him about. He'd never learned his lesson. He was still lying, still manipulating, still expecting everyone else to clean up after him. I thanked Marcus quietly and walked away, my mind already working through what this meant. Victoria called me that week. "Just checking in," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I wanted to see how you're doing after everything." Her tone made it clear she didn't care. She wanted to provoke me, to get me to say something angry or emotional that she could use against me. "I'm doing well," I said calmly, taking things one day at a time. She laughed softly. Of course you are. You know, Miles has always been special. He always lands on his feet. I'm sure you understand that someone like him needs someone more intelligent to appreciate his talents." The insult was wrapped in honey, but I tasted the poison underneath. She was trying to make me feel stupid, small, unworthy. I listened to her continue talking, saying nasty things disguised as concern, and I said nothing. My silence was more powerful than any words could be. When she finally hung up, frustrated that I wasn't reacting, I realized something. I was learning to use control differently. Not the kind that meant giving everything, but the kind that meant saying nothing and watching people reveal themselves. The board meeting happened on a Wednesday. Miles stood up to present his work on the Henderson account. He talked about efficiency, about how he'd managed to reduce costs while maintaining quality. He talked like he'd done something brilliant. I watched from my seat, quiet and careful. When he finished, I raised my hand. "Just one question," I said politely. "The original budget for this project was $230,000. The final cost was $275,000. Can you walk us through where the $35,000 increase came from?" The room went quiet. Miles's face went red. He stammered something about unforeseen circumstances and additional requirements. But he couldn't explain it. Not really. Not in a way that made sense. My boss, Mr. Henderson, looked interested. "I'd like to see the detailed breakdown," he said, looking directly at Miles. That one small truth, that one polite question, cracked the wall Miles had built. I saw it happen right there in that conference room. One truth can dismantle lies, I thought. One question can expose everything. After the meeting, a junior colleague named Jasmine came up to me. She was nervous, looking over her shoulder like she was worried about being seen talking to me. "I've been frustrated with Miles for months," she said quietly. "He takes credit for work I do. He manipulates numbers. He lies in meetings." She handed me a folder with documents. "I've kept copies of everything. I don't know if it helps, but you might want to have them." She walked away before I could respond. My hands felt steady as I held that folder. This was proof. Real, tangible evidence. Validation that I wasn't imagining things, that Miles really was as dishonest as my gut told me he was. I walked back to my desk and locked the folder in my drawer. Each piece of evidence felt like picking up a tool I didn't know I had. I was building something, even if I wasn't exactly sure what yet. Miles came home angry that night. He found me at my laptop, working on a personal project. "What the hell were you doing in that meeting?" he demanded. "Making me look stupid?" I didn't look up. I just kept typing. My silence was louder than any explanation could be. He stood there, waiting for me to defend myself, to apologize, to be the soft version of Samantha he was used to. But I wasn't that version anymore. That version was buried in the kitchen at midnight, paying his debts with money she didn't have. He left the room frustrated, muttering about how I was meddling in things I didn't understand. But I could see something in his eyes, the first crack of doubt. He was beginning to sense that something had shifted. He just didn't know what. I kept digging. I found the mismanaged client account that Jasmine had mentioned. It was connected to something bigger, a personal financial game Miles had been playing, using company funds to cover gaps in his personal debt. The more I looked, the more I understood just how deep his deception ran. He hadn't learned anything from the debts I'd paid off. He'd just gotten smarter about hiding it. But now I held information that was powerful enough to influence his entire career. I could have gone straight to management. I could have blown everything open. But I didn't. Not yet. I was learning patience. I was learning that real power wasn't about making a dramatic move. It was about understanding exactly when and how to make it. I started investing in myself. I took online certifications in financial analysis. I reconnected with colleagues I'd neglected. I started speaking up more in meetings, sharing ideas, building my professional reputation. I wasn't doing it to get revenge on Miles. I was doing it because I deserved better than being the soft woman who paid her husband's debts. I was rebuilding into someone stronger. The underdog was rising, and I could feel it. People at work started noticing. They asked my opinion on projects. They included me in important meetings. Marcus told me I was becoming indispensable. What he didn't realize was that this wasn't about luck or timing. This was about me reclaiming my own power. In meetings, I started asking strategic questions. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would make Miles suspicious. Just small questions that forced him to explain his numbers, his decisions, his logic. Each question was like a gentle push. And each time, he revealed another inconsistency, another lie, another layer of his manipulation. The other people in the room started noticing. They started exchanging looks when Miles spoke. The tension in the room would shift. I was learning how to be subtle, how to be strategic, how to control a narrative without ever raising my voice. A client called in during one of our meetings. They wanted to discuss a project milestone. Miles jumped up to take the call, confident as always. But when he came back, his smile was gone. The client had asked about something Miles had promised that never actually happened. The client wasn't angry yet, but they were confused. Miles tried to explain, but his explanation didn't make sense. The client said they'd call back and hung up. The room was silent. Everyone saw it, the first public embarrassment, the first crack in Miles's perfect facade. I sat quietly, watching, savoring the moment without showing it on my face. Victoria invited us to dinner that weekend. This was after the divorce papers were signed but before the actual divorce was finalized. She probably thought we'd still pretend to be a couple for appearances. She wanted to gloat. I remember her sitting at the head of the table, talking about how some women just don't have what it takes to keep their marriages together. She looked at me when she said it. She was trying to hurt me, to make me feel small. But instead of shrinking, I leaned forward. I talked about my work, about the certifications I'd earned, about a client I'd helped save thousands of dollars through better financial management. I watched her face change. She expected broken Samantha. She expected me to cry or defend myself. Instead, she got someone composed, intelligent and confident. She got someone who wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. By the end of dinner, Victoria was quiet. The smirk was gone. A former friend of Miles reached out to me through email. We'd known him since college. He said he felt guilty about something. He said that years ago, Miles had lied about him to look better in front of his friends. He said he'd kept quiet because it wasn't worth the drama. But now, seeing how Miles treated me, he felt like he needed to say something. He sent me evidence, emails, text messages, stories about Miles's pattern of deception going back years. My heart raced reading through it. This wasn't just about recent behavior. This was about character. This was about showing that Miles's dishonesty wasn't a new thing. It was who he was. An unexpected ally had just handed me another tool. I started mentoring junior colleagues at work. People like Jasmine. People who didn't have powerful voices yet. I helped them understand their worth, taught them how to document their work, show them how to stand up for themselves professionally. Word got around that I was supportive, that I actually cared about helping people succeed. My reputation grew. Meanwhile, Miles's attempts to sabotage me started failing. When he tried to take credit for my work, people already knew better. When he tried to exclude me from important meetings, the boss specifically asked for me to be there. The more he tried to push me down, the more he actually pushed me up. I could see the frustration building inside him. He couldn't understand why his usual tactics weren't working anymore. The key client finally made their move. They said they weren't happy with the quality of work on their account. They were threatening to leave the company entirely. This was a huge deal, millions of dollars in revenue. Mr. Henderson called an urgent meeting to figure out what went wrong. I brought all my documentation. I carefully walked through every problem with the account, every inconsistency, every missed deadline. The evidence pointed directly at Miles's mismanagement, but I presented it calmly, like I was just reporting facts, not trying to blame anyone. The client stayed, but Miles's credibility took a serious hit. Mr. Henderson started assigning the account to me to oversee. I was gaining credit, gaining responsibility, and gaining power, all while maintaining my composure. Late one night, I sat in my apartment and let myself remember everything. I remembered the promises Miles had made, the late nights paying off his debts, the dreams I'd put on hold, the way I'd twisted myself into knots trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. The heartbreak was real. It sat in my chest like a stone, but somewhere along the way, that heartbreak had transformed into something else. It had become fuel, strategic patience, determination, the kind of strength that doesn't come from anger but from clarity. I wasn't trying to hurt Miles. I was just trying to survive, and survival meant making sure he couldn't hurt me anymore. Or anyone else. Miles started falling apart. He could feel it happening, even if he didn't understand why. Clients were hesitant. Colleagues kept their distance. His projects kept getting reassigned. He'd call me angry, asking what I'd done, what I'd said about him. And I'd answer honestly, I hadn't done anything but tell the truth. That was what he couldn't handle. It wasn't dramatic revenge. It was just reality catching up with him. His arrogance had always been his biggest problem. He really believed he was too smart to get caught, too charming to be doubted, too valuable to be replaced. But the truth was that he was replaceable, and people were finally seeing through his charm. I had a moment where I doubted myself. One of my recommendations didn't work out the way I'd planned. A project I'd pushed for underperformed. For a minute, I felt like the fraud, like maybe I wasn't as capable as I'd been starting to believe. The old Samantha would have spiraled. The old Samantha would have used it as proof that she wasn't good enough. But I'd learned something from all of this. Mistakes are just learning opportunities. I analyzed what went wrong, made adjustments, and came back stronger. My boss actually appreciated my transparency about the failure. That's when I realized real strength isn't about never making mistakes. It's about handling them with grace and actually learning from them. I was stronger after that setback than I was before. I compiled everything. Folder after folder of documentation. Every lie, every manipulation, every financial inconsistency. Text messages, emails, project reports, client communications, testimony from colleagues. It was undeniable. This wasn't gossip or interpretation. This was proof. By now, I had enough evidence to show that Miles's entire career performance was built on deception. I kept the folders locked away, not ready to use them yet, but ready, waiting for the perfect moment when the impact would be maximum. I'd learned that timing was everything. The moment came on a Tuesday morning. Mr. Henderson called me into his office. He asked me directly, "Is there anything about Miles's work I should know?" He was giving me an opening, a chance to speak. I brought out my folders. I sat there calmly and walked him through everything. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't angry. I was just factual. I let the evidence speak for itself. Mr. Henderson's expression grew darker as he looked through everything. When I finished, he said quietly, "Thank you for bringing this to me." That afternoon, Victoria called Miles. I never found out what she said, but something had happened. She understood that her influence was crumbling, that her son's lies were catching up with him, that there was nothing she could do to fix this. Everything happened fast after that. Miles was put on administrative leave, pending investigation. The company hired an external auditor. Clients started asking questions about their accounts. Former colleagues came forward with their own stories. The empire Miles had built on lies collapsed like a house of cards. His mother stopped calling. His friends stopped inviting him places. By the end of the week, he wasn't at the office anymore. I heard later that he'd been fired, but honestly, I didn't follow it too closely. That part wasn't about me anymore. I just kept doing my job, kept being excellent at what I did, kept being the person I'd fought so hard to become. And I stayed composed through all of it. I stood at my desk on a Friday afternoon, looking at the office around me. 6 months had passed since the divorce was finalized. My apartment was mine alone now, quiet, peaceful, exactly how I wanted it. My job had expanded. My reputation was solid. I'd turned my heartbreak into power, my betrayal into strategy, my weakness into strength. The girl who'd paid her husband's debts was gone. In her place stood someone who understood her own value. I thought about that moment in the kitchen when I found those divorce papers, how small I'd felt, how broken. I thought about Miles and Victoria and their smirks, thinking they'd won. They hadn't understood that sometimes the best revenge isn't about making someone pay. It's about building something better than they could ever destroy. I smiled, knowing I'd learned the most important lesson of all. I didn't need Miles to fail for me to succeed. I just needed to stop carrying him. My name is Samantha Miller. And this is just the beginning.